Once you understand that outcomes reflect systems rather than intentions, you focus on what you can control. You start building better systems. And when you build better systems, the results shift. Not because you wished harder, not because you explained yourself more clearly, not because you stayed busy. They change because you change the behaviors that create them. That's the real power of accepting the honest feedback that results give you. There's a big difference between being active and actually making progress. But a lot of people go through life never separating the two. They judge their days by how packed their schedule was, not by what actually improved. They mix up movement with momentum and assume that if they're exhausted, they must be getting somewhere. But being tired doesn't prove you're growing. It only proves you spent energy. This confusion becomes even clearer when you look at how activity fills time without changing outcomes. Activity can easily look like productivity. Someone can reply to messages all day, sit in meetings all week, keep adjusting plans every month, and still have nothing meaningful to show for it. The calendar stays full, the hours get used up, the brain feels busy, but at the end of a few months, nothing has truly changed. Income hasn't increased, skills haven't improved, strength hasn't grown. It felt like movement, but it wasn't real progress. Progress is different because it shows up in measurable improvement. Something has to increase, get stronger, get sharper, or expand. The numbers need to move. Performance needs to improve. The outcomes need to show that yesterday's work created a better result today. If there's no clear sign of improvement, then there's no progress, no matter how busy you felt. A lot of people hide inside busyness. If they stay constantly occupied, they don't have to look at what isn't working. Staying busy becomes a way to protect their ego. It lets them say, I'm working hard, without ever asking, is this actually working? That second question is uncomfortable because it forces you to evaluate instead of assume. You can put serious effort into the wrong thing. You can get very good at things that don't really matter. You can pour energy into activities that don't create leverage. Just trying hard doesn't guarantee forward movement. The direction of your effort determines whether it has value. If what you're doing doesn't move an important metric, it might just be eating up time. Repeating the same thing without making adjustments leads to staying stuck. If you use the same method week after week and nothing changes, that's not discipline, that's inertia. Real discipline means you're paying attention. It means you're tracking results. It means you're refining what you're doing. If you lift the same weight over and over without increasing it, your muscles stop adapting. If you practice a skill but never correct your mistakes, your performance levels off. Growth happens when you introduce challenge, not when you stay comfortable. When you don't measure anything, comfort starts to replace growth. Without tracking progress, it's easy to tell yourself you're improving. You rely on how you feel instead of what's actually happening. But feelings go up and down. They change with your mood. Metrics don't shift based on emotion. They show what's real. Progress requires tracking instead of guessing. Guessing leaves you confused. Tracking gives you clarity. If you want better health, you need to measure something specific. Strength levels, endurance, body composition, or how consistent you are with habits. If you want to increase income, you need to track output, skill growth, or the value you're delivering. If you want stronger relationships, you need to pay attention to communication patterns, how often you spend meaningful time together, and whether you follow through. Whatever you measure, you give yourself the chance to improve. When results slow down, many people just add more random effort. They work longer hours. They pile on extra things. They increase activity without changing direction. But random effort isn't the same thing as strategy. If a key doesn't open a door, forcing it harder won't fix the problem. You have to look at the key and look at the lock. Then you make the right adjustment. It's possible to feel completely drained and still not be effective. Exhaustion can feel like sacrifice, and sacrifice can feel admirable. But feeling noble doesn't automatically create results. If what you're doing isn't producing measurable change, it needs to be questioned. A disciplined person is willing to check whether their effort actually lines up with the outcome they want. The difference between activity and progress becomes obvious when you define clear indicators. In each important area of life, pick 3 to 5 measurements that really matter. In health, that could be strength improvements, consistent workouts, or cutting back on harmful habits. In finances, it could be savings rate, income growth, or paying down debt. In skill development, it might be hitting performance benchmarks or demonstrating real competence. In relationships, it could be quality time, resolving conflict well, or being dependable. Once you know what matters, review those indicators every week instead of waiting for your emotions to tell you something is wrong. Don't wait until you're frustrated. Don't wait for a crisis to get your attention. Weekly evaluation catches small problems before they turn into big ones. It shortens the gap between mistake and correction. It keeps minor inefficiencies from growing into major setbacks. Comfort can easily hide stagnation. If your routine feels familiar and manageable, it's tempting to assume it's effective. But effectiveness has to show up in the numbers. If your key indicators aren't improving, something needs to shift. That shift might be your method. It might be your intensity. It might be your focus. But it has to be intentional, not just emotional. Progress usually isn't dramatic day to day, but it becomes obvious over time. Small improvements add up. Tiny refinements compound. A 1% improvement repeated consistently turns into something significant. That only happens when effort is directed thoughtfully instead of randomly. When you clearly separate activity from advancement, your time starts to carry more weight. You stop filling your schedule just to feel productive. You stop confusing motion with mastery. You start asking, what actually creates leverage? And you focus your energy there. Leverage is what multiplies results. It's the action that affects several outcomes at once. It's the habit that improves multiple areas of your life. It's the skill that increases your value in different situations. Once you find those leverage points, progress speeds up without you having to stay in constant motion. That kind of clarity lowers anxiety. When you know what you're measuring and how you're evaluating it, there's less uncertainty. You're not guessing whether you're improving. You can see it. The numbers back it up. Your performance shows it. Your relationships reflect it. You can stay busy for decades and never really move forward. Progress requires intention. It requires honest evaluation. It requires making changes when something isn't working. It forces you to stop hiding behind effort and start focusing on effectiveness. Results don't respond to noise. They respond to alignment. They respond to precision. They respond to systems that consistently create measurable improvement. Once you understand the difference between being busy and being effective, you take back control of your time and energy. At that point, your main question changes. Instead of asking, how much did I do? You start asking, what did it actually produce? That shift alone turns simple motion into real momentum and effort into meaningful progress. Outcomes don't just show how you performed. They reveal your standards. They show what you actually accept in your life, not just what you say you care about. Your life isn't shaped only by what you intend to do, but by the level of behavior you repeatedly allow. This is where the conversation moves from performance to principles. Standards are proven by consistency. Anyone can talk about high principles. Anyone can say they value excellence. Anyone can describe the life they want. But standards aren't proven through words. They're proven through repetition. What you consistently do is your real standard. What you repeatedly allow becomes part of who you are. Excuses quietly lower standards. They don't show up announcing that you're giving up. They sound reasonable. They sound temporary. They sound justified. But every time you choose an excuse instead of discipline, your standard drops a little. The drop might seem small, but small drops add up. Over time, things that once felt unacceptable start to feel normal. What you tolerate shapes your direction. If you tolerate skipped workouts, lower effort becomes your routine. If you tolerate careless spending, financial instability starts to feel familiar. If you tolerate disrespect in conversations, tension becomes expected. Whatever you consistently permit continues. The direction of your life follows what you repeatedly allow. If your health results are poor, it points to inconsistent discipline. That doesn't mean you don't know what to do. It means the right behaviors aren't being enforced consistently enough to build strength. If your finances feel unstable, it suggests your standards around earning, saving, or spending aren't clear or firm. If your relationships are strained, the standard for communication or patience isn't strong enough. Outcomes make this clear without emotion. A lot of people are surprised by their results because they judge themselves by what they aspire to, not by what they actually do. They say they value health, but rarely move with intention. They say they value growth, but avoid difficult study. They say they value stability, but make impulsive decisions. Results don't measure what you hope for. They measure what you enforce. Your life reflects what you repeatedly permit. If you allow distraction, distraction spreads. If you allow inconsistency, that becomes your rhythm. If you accept mediocrity in small areas, it eventually shows up in larger ones. The reflection shows patterns, not promises. Standards aren't built on mood. They're built on non-negotiable actions. When you decide certain behaviors will happen, regardless of how you feel, you raise the baseline of your life. You remove the daily debate. You stop negotiating with yourself. The behavior becomes automatic because the standard is firm. There's a clear difference between a preference and a standard. A preference says, I'd like to. A standard says, I will. A preference fades when you're tired. A standard holds. A preference depends on convenience. A standard pushes through inconvenience. Your results show whether you're living by preference or by principle. Small acts of neglect add up to visible consequences. You don't notice the first compromise. You barely notice the second. But after weeks or months, the impact is obvious. Your body changes. Your bank account shifts. Your skills stall. Your relationship loses warmth. What seems small becomes impossible to ignore. The result is simply the summary of the exceptions you allowed. Raising your standards doesn't mean changing everything overnight. It means enforcing what matters. Decide what is non-negotiable. In health, that could mean consistent movement, structured eating, and proper rest. In finances, it could mean steady saving and intentional spending. In skill development, it might mean daily practice and regular feedback. In relationships, it could mean active listening and dependable follow-through. These actions create clear boundaries. Once you define your standards, you have to check them daily. Compare what you did with what you said you value. Do it calmly and honestly. If you fall short, correct it quickly. The longer you wait, the more the compromise settles in. Fast correction strengthens the standard. Some people try to raise every standard at once and burn out. Real progress is gradual. Raise one behavior. Enforce it until it becomes consistent. Then add another. Over time, your baseline rises. What once felt difficult starts to feel normal. The new standard becomes your default. Enforcement has to be personal. You can't outsource discipline. You can't assign consistency to someone else. People can support you, but they can't do the work for you. Maintaining your standard is your responsibility. When you accept that fully, it doesn't feel heavy. It feels empowering. A disciplined person understands that standards shape identity. If you consistently keep your commitments, you become reliable. If you consistently prepare well, you become capable. If you consistently manage your impulses, you become stable. Identity isn't something you announce. It's something you demonstrate through repeated behavior. With that in mind, how you respond to disappointing results becomes critical. When results disappoint you, instead of looking for something external to blame, look at what you allowed. Ask which small compromise kept repeating. Ask where enforcement weakened. Most of the time, the answer isn't dramatic. It's a series of small allowances that were never corrected. There's freedom in realizing this.